Whenever.
All right, you're good.
Perfect. In the world we live in today, we are surrounded by many social, diplomatic, and technological achievements, which have been made to better prepare and to better progress our world that we live in today. And many of these achievements are thanks to some of history's greatest minds. However, there's one man who stands among the rest and whose influence still lasts on our world today. That man's name is Napoleon Bonaparte. Having intently studied French history since I was a little boy, I've always been fascinated by some of France's greatest minds, most notably Napoleon. Partly in due to my dual citizenship with France and the United States, and also partly in love for my love for history in general, Napoleon has always stood out as one of those greatest technological and militaristic minds who just changed our world so much. And that's where I drew a lot of my interest from him. Our world, like I stated earlier, is full of many diplomatic and social achievements. But in order to better fully appreciate these achievements that we have in our world today, it is very useful and necessary to go back to the root and to understand where these things came from so we can have a better appreciation when we use them. This is why today I would like to share with you the story of Napoleon Bonaparte, comprising of 5 key parts: his rise to power, his diplomatic and social achievements, his Napoleonic War conquests, his missteps and ultimate downfall, and his lasting legacy on our world today. Now, join me as we take a step back in time as we go to the beginning, to where it all began. And this is the story of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was born on the island of Corsica in 1769 to a poor family. He was often bullied and mocked in high school due to his accent and his size and name. It was for this reason he was searching for a new pathway in life, and he ultimately attended l'École Militaire in Paris in 1784, joining the ranks of the military. He was widely successful during his studies and eventually joined the military in 1785, during the height of the French Revolution. After great battles and victories in Vienna, Austria, and also Italy, and after an expedition to Egypt in which he attempted to quell the British advancement in that region, more specifically on their pathway to India, he gained a lot of popularity and fame amongst the soldiers, which eventually led him up to rise through the ranks from brigadier general to lieutenant to corporal, and eventually to general. And while he was in Egypt, he ultimately realized that it was time to return to Paris, realizing that the French Revolution had torn the country apart. Thus, on November 9th, 1799, Napoleon returned to Paris, and with some help of his friends in the government, they were able to overthrow the French Directory, which was the temporary government established after the French Revolution, in which he established himself council. Napoleon's rise to power was unprecedented, unlike anything the world had ever seen before. Now, let's take a look at some of the things Napoleon did after he captured power. On the terms of social achievements, one of the greatest things Napoleon did was institute his Napoleonic Law Code, which overthrew the old feudal system of Europe and instituted the legal systems of democracy and justice, which are actually evident in a lot of legal systems in the world today. And also put an emphasis on the sciences, which eventually led, which Napoleon himself even encouraged, the establishment of the metric system, which is also another giant system which is used around the world except for America to this day. And he also reformed schools, specifically le lycée, which is a high school, the word for high school in French. And he also created a centralized curriculum so that every child in France would be learning the same thing, greatly improving the level of education in the country. And on the diplomatic front, he sold French Louisiana to the United States in 1803 on the cheap, which improved his relationship with America while also curbing British expansion in the New World. And he also reformed the armies, which would lead to the creation of his famous Grande Armée. And he did this by improving the morale of the army, by recognition and rewarding those loyal to him, and also capturing the excitement off of the strong sense of nationalism that was found in France at the time. As we can see, Napoleon did a lot in just a short amount of time. He truly did change France for the better. And now we're going to take a look at how he put his plan into motion and how he influenced Europe through the Napoleonic Wars. So there's multiple miniature wars in the Napoleonic Wars. Starting with the Third Coalition, France defeated Austria at the Battle of Ulm and Vienna. And it was here where he cemented France's return to dominance, whereas Europe saw France as a weakling after the end of the French Revolution. In the Fourth Coalition, he defeated Prussia and Russia at the Battle of Friedland, and he ultimately, as a result of this war, brought most of Europe back under his control, under what we call the continental system, which basically put Napoleon at the head, and he was able to influence Europe as he wished. And the Battle of the Fifth Coalition was basically just a rematch against Austria, and just like the first time, Austria failed, and this time at the Battle of Wagram. And it was after this war that Napoleon truly cemented his influence over Europe, and that's where a lot of the reforms began to happen that were aforementioned earlier. However, things started to take a turn for the worse for Napoleon, starting with the invasion of Russia and the Battle of the Sixth Coalition. In 1812, Russia had stopped complying with the continental system. Napoleon didn't like this very much, so he launched an offensive attack against Russia with over 600,000 troops in his Grande Armée. They marched on Russia, but instead the Russians refused to head-on attack or fight the French, and instead they retreated, burning everything as they retreated. No livestock, no shelter, no food, no nothing, leaving the French absolutely nothing to capture once they got there. Napoleon and the Grande Armée entered Moscow. However, it was nothing but burning, and once again, there was nothing left for them to capture. As Napoleon waited for Tsar Nicholas I to surrender, he realized that a surrender would ultimately never come, and thus Napoleon and his army decided to retreat. And it was at this time when the Russian winter settled in. The road back was treacherous for France, and Napoleon exited Russia with only 40,000 troops, far less than the 600,000 that entered. He returned to France and replenished his army numbers. However, he was unable to defeat the advancing coalition, the Sixth Army Coalitions, at the Battle of Leipzig in modern-day Germany. He was offered to remain emperor, but only in France's natural territory and boundaries, losing most of the land which he'd conquered. He ultimately rejected this, and the Sixth Coalition armies closed in and captured Paris, and he ultimately abdicated in 1814. Just as quickly as Napoleon rose, Napoleon fell. And so now we'll take a look at some of the reasons as to why he fell. His biggest misstep of them all was attacking Spain. At the time, Spain was an ally of France. And when the Portuguese started to align themselves with the British, Spain and France teamed up to defeat Portugal. However, after France marched their armies into Spain, France turned on Spain and took control of the entire Iberian Peninsula, losing basically his only big ally. And this would prove troublesome for Napoleon as the Spanish would fight for years and years using guerrilla tactics, ultimately ousting France in 1814. And like I said, he abdicated in 1814 and he was exiled to the little island of Elba in the Mediterranean Sea. However, this would not last long because in February of 1815, he escaped Elba and returned to France. He even won the support of the army that was sent to kill him. This is how influential Napoleon was. Together with the army, they marched on Paris, recaptured control, replenished the army numbers once again of his Grande Armée, and he looked to go and catch the 7th Coalition armies off guard, which were currently stationed near the town of Waterloo, which is in modern-day Belgium. This surprise attack worked initially. However, the British, combined with Dutch forces, were able to stall Napoleon long enough on top of the hill just outside the town of Waterloo until more reinforcements were able to come, ultimately forcing Napoleon to retreat for one final time, to which he abdicated for the last time in 1815. This time, he was sent into exile on the island of St. Helena, which was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, a little bit further than Elba. And this time, he was not able to escape, and he remained on St. Helena until he died in 1825. As we saw, Napoleon rose and fell. It's incredible to think that from the time he took power in 1799, and until his exile in 1815, in just 15 short years, he changed the world. And as a result of this, I'd like to now put a final emphasis on his lasting legacy and why his influence mattered then and why it matters now today. The main thing that he did was inspire independence. While he was an autocratic dictator, a militaristic dictator at the helm, it was his fight to want to liberate the people from a monarch that actually inspired many countries to want to fight for their independence. He also put the ideals of the French Revolution on center stage for the whole world to see. And like the American Revolution, the French Revolution would go on to spark and to influence many countries, such as Haiti, in their quests for revolution. He also had a major influence on the global scale. In fact, when he defeated the Holy Roman Empire back in 1804, he reformed the states into a confederation, which made them more easily to be governed, which laid the groundwork for those states to become modern-day Germany, and which, as we know today, Germany has produced a lot of important social, technological advancements, which we enjoy today. And even after all this, his Napoleonic law code is still in effect today, in this day in the world today, in Belgium, the Netherlands, and even in the United States state of Louisiana, which was once ruled by France. In just a short amount of time, we saw Napoleon's rise to power, his conquests, his achievements, and his missteps and failure. Now, in conclusion, let us take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Napoleon truly changed the world. From his rise to power, to his social and diplomatic achievements, to his Napoleonic War conquests and how he influenced Europe, to his ultimate missteps and downfall, which brought us to his lasting legacy. Napoleon did a lot. Napoleon had his missteps. He had his downfalls. He was not a perfect man by any means. There was a lot of things he could have done better. However, Napoleon had one thing that went for him, and that was his heart and love for the French people. In conclusion, a world without Napoleon would not be the world we have today. And whether people realize it or not, Napoleon truly loved France and wanted nothing more than France to be happy. In fact, what is inscribed on top of his mausoleum is the inscription, J'espère que mes cendres peuvent reposer sur le bord de la Seine, au milieu de ce peuple français que j'ai tant aimé. Or a translation, my wish is that my ashes can be scattered along the riverbank of the Seine River, amongst the French people who I've loved so dearly. Love him or hate him, Napoleon truly changed the world for the better. His diplomatic and social achievements, unforgettable. And his influence and mark that he left upon the world, undeniable. Thank you.
Nice job.